Welcome to Mom and
with your co-host, developmental psychologist Dr. Marty Erickson and Dr. Aaron Erickson, maternal child health specialist and nurse practitioner.
Here's my grandma Marty, and here's Aaron, my mom and I.
Welcome to Mom Enough. I'm Erin Erickson, and I'm thrilled to have a couple of great guests joining us today from our supporting partner, Kinderberry Hill. And we're going to be talking about conscious discipline. Our guests are Sarah Reichstadt and Katie Zhang. Sarah is the education coordinator for the 7 NAEYC accredited Twin Cities Kinderberry Hill Child Development Centers. She earned her degree in child psychology from the University of Minnesota, where she trained in the Shirley G. Moore Lab School. Since joining Kinderberry Hill in 1999, she has taught in infant, toddler, and preschool classrooms and served in management positions. As education coordinator, Sarah helps implement curriculum, offers classroom support, and conducts teacher trainings. She's passionate about early childhood and helping children, teachers, and families, and she knows the importance of these things as a mom to 2 young children, too. Katie earned a degree from UW River Falls in early childhood education and elementary education. She holds a Minnesota teaching license for birth through 6th grade. Katie has spent 2 decades working in early childhood education. The past 12 years have been with Kinderberry Hill. Katie has taught in all early childhood age groups, and she is currently a toddler teacher at Kinderberry Hill, Roseville. Katie is the mom to 3 children and 1 who's currently enrolled at Kinderberry Hill, and she has 2 children who are in elementary and middle school. So you both come with a wealth of knowledge as experts in early childhood and as moms. So we're thrilled to have you both. Thank you so much for joining us, Katie and Sarah.
And I'll add my welcome to Aaron's. We're really delighted to have you here, and we so appreciate the support of Kinderberry Hill as one of our supporting partners. I love your topic today, conscious discipline. And I wonder if you could start us off by just talking about what that really means.
Sure. So when we're talking about conscious discipline, basically just kind of a textbook definition, it's a social emotional curriculum, and it's based on brain research. So Dr. Becky Bailey is the creator, and she originally designed this for classrooms. But what's happening now is it's being used by parents in the home and even actually starting to branch out to businesses. What conscious discipline does is it teaches children how to regulate themselves. It helps them manage their emotions and be able to make safe and healthy choices when dealing with big emotions that might come up. And one of the key we call them aha moments of conscious discipline training is it all starts with the adult. If the adult cannot regulate themselves first, we can't scaffold and give the child the skills then to use. And so all of the training really runs through the adult. The part that I want to just briefly touch on it's built around brain states, and that's kind of key to understanding how to interact with children. So there's 3 brain states, and conscious discipline teaches us to recognize those and then helps us know what tools to use for each state. And that's kind of the textbook piece of conscious discipline.
So what are the 3 brain states?
There is survival state. That's kind of your fight or flight state, emotional state, and that's looks like name calling or blaming. And then there's the executive state, and that's what we all want to be in order to problem solve and compromise. The executive state is where we're functioning at our highest, and conscious discipline helps us walk through that first as the adult to get to that state before we react to behaviors.
Well, it sounds like I could also use this with my teenagers who
Yes.
lack some executive functioning.
I was thinking we could use it with ourselves, Aaron.
Well, that too.
Especially during this difficult year where we're just hopefully finishing.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Think that we found that too. I think that's why they've expanded into homes and businesses, because I mean, I find it even using it with my husband as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that working?
Okay, he's starting to catch on when I am conscious disciplining him.
That's awesome. I'm hoping I can get my kids to put the toilet seat down and my husband to wipe off the countertops when he's done doing the dishes. So how have you seen this to be helpful in the classroom or in your personal lives as parents?
Yeah, definitely. So in the classroom right now, I am working with toddlers, and part of conscious discipline, a way to regulate yourself is breathing. So just pausing and taking a few deep breaths. And I see that I use that myself in the classroom, but then we're also teaching these 1 and 2 year olds to pause and take a breath. And we're teaching them different breathing things, whether it's pretending to smell a flower, taking that big deep breath in, and then breathing out and pretending like you're blowing a pinwheel. And you'll see them doing that kind of in the classroom, or even them. Mirror neurons are a beautiful thing where younger children, if they see you doing something, they automatically copy you. And so if I can catch their attention and I take a very visual deep breath, they automatically take a deep breath. And it really helps, 1 and 2 year olds with that impulse control, that they're just learning impulse control at that age. And so with toddlers, that breathing and pausing really helps.
I'm remembering this moment when my son was little and he had made a not so great choice. So I had said he couldn't have something that was going to be out on the table, or like a treat or something. And we had always done a lot of breathing, so we would just do like fill the balloon in your belly. And I saw him sitting at the end of the table, and he was like, and then he says, my brain's telling me to grab that treat, but I'm not going to. So it was like, you could see him actually, going through this process of, I didn't know that it was conscious discipline, but apparently we were doing a little bit of that.
Yes.
Well, and I think, Erin, you really used this practice a lot, whether you were using the name or not, because you started from a very early age with your kids with the breathing and with that focus on, first of all, you were connecting with them rather than, giving them a timeout to push them away from you. You were staying there with them and often just putting a hand on their shoulder and doing that modeling for them so they would pick it up from you, even if you didn't tell them to do that. But often you would say, I remember you put your hand on McKinley's belly and just say, take 3 big belly breaths. And he would just take that so seriously. I think our temptation as parents and as educators, but I think more so as parents because we're so emotionally tied up in how our children are behaving and, how that reflects on our parenting. I think it's so tempting to just escalate. So when a child is not regulating well, is kind of out of control, we become out of control. We're doing the mirroring of what our child is doing instead of the other way around. And so I think, bringing everything down when your child is up is so effective. And these concrete strategies, Katie, that you were talking about, pretend you're smelling a flower or pretending you're blowing a pinwheel, those are just great concrete things to kind of have in your mind, have in your repertoire, so you can use those in those moments as you bring yourself down and help to bring your child down.
Yeah, it's so great. And I was just going to say, Mom, you talk about these moments with McKinley, and I don't want anybody to have any false ideas that I did this with perfection on any sort of regular basis. There were plenty of times where I probably needed to do quite a bit more breathing than he did.
Well, of course you did it perfectly, because I did it perfectly with you, right?
Right, for sure. Well, we'll save perfectionism for another day, but
yeah.
I'm wondering if, Katie, if you had any insights as a parent and how you've seen this play out in your own parenting.
I think exactly what Marty was talking about. So with my 4th grader and 7th grader, they've been distance learning. We've all been home together, just spending way too much time together. And I've noticed definitely, we're just at each other a little bit more, and especially those two are at each other a little bit more. And I have to really watch, what kind of energy I bring to the situation. And so If I'm able to pause, if they're mad at each other, or my fourth grader or seventh grader is mad at me, if I'm able to pause, take a few deep breaths, make sure I'm in that executive state and I have that, calm energy that I bring to the situation, there's usually a very different outcome than if I'm bringing fuel to the fire.
Well, that makes such great sense. Really appreciate that helpful insight.
One of the things I like to do within this kind of approach is when children are getting loud, just to very mindfully and intentionally whisper. And, it's amazing how some little thing like that can really just kind of cut that escalation that's starting. So that's as both as a grandmother and way back, when my kids were little, and not so little. I think adolescence is a time when these kinds of things really work as well. That sort of just doing the opposite really of what your initial impulse is, and gradually then that becomes your impulse to do that de-escalating and kind of do the right thing, I guess. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the really concrete things that parents can do at home right now. I know our audience just loves to get those real specific tips, and and to the extent that you can give some examples about how this might look the same or different with different ages of kids, because we do have a lot of people who have kids across the spectrum, and as you've said and we've said, this is really an approach that I think works at every level, and maybe even for our partners, but we don't want to embarrass them by talking too much about that, which I tend to do.
I think I would say the first thing that we can do as parents at home today, really being intentional about the connection that we make throughout the day. And if we look at our day, and I know, let's just say that I know bedtime might be a time when I struggle with my son. And if I say 5 minutes, we put on pajamas and then we've got bedtime, I know that in those 5 minutes, when I say put on pajamas, it's time for bed, we're going to have, there's going to be a little conflict. But if I could build into my schedule, I say, okay, come on up, it's time for jammas. But before we do that, and just take a few minutes to get on his level, look in his eyes, and maybe it's pick out your favorite bedtime story or whatever it might be, just to do that connection piece. Sit in a chair and rock, tell me about your day. If we just connect a little bit before that struggle comes, I think it sets us up for success when that
Oh,
time of the day comes.
that's awesome. I love that kind of a preemptive,
Intention, yeah.
yeah, that is the intentionality of it. It makes so much
Mhm.
sense.
You mentioned, Sarah, something about looking into his eyes or making
Yep,
eye contact. And, I think we forget that sometimes as parents, and we're sort of
yep,
dealing with 10 different things at once. And so our visual attention is literally just, kind of moving around the
yes,
room. And I think that's a really important point about connecting. Eye contact, or maybe a gentle touch on the arm or
yes,
something. Kids receive things so differently
yep.
if we're really down there at their level and touching them, or letting them know that we're really, really looking at them and paying
Yeah.
attention to them. And
And
that,
playfulness is another
oh,
part
yeah.
of making sure that that connection builds. Eye contact, touch, playfulness, that's how we're building connection. But the
That connection is huge, and it's like an additive thing, like it adds up throughout the day. So the more little times you are connecting with someone throughout the day, the easier a hard part of the day might be.
Yeah, I'm imagining that even if, before you were like, hey, it's time to go to bed, you just kind of gave them a hug and said, hey, what was your favorite thing about today?
Mhm.
And then that would be kind of like a nice way to form a moment of connection. And they're probably less likely to be like, no, I don't want to put my jammies on.
Yes. I would say the other thing for parents to think about today, conscious discipline calls them triggers, but there's like habits or ways that we have all been raised or been working with children for years. And if we can take a moment to pause and think through what that habit might be. For example, if my children are name calling, the habit of mine might be we don't name call in this house. but I'm not offering them any skill. If I can pause for a moment, get myself to the highest level of my brain, then I can actually offer them something helpful, a skill to use instead of the name calling.
Sarah, can you give some examples of that just to think about? I mean, try to dig into the things that you've done with kids in your classroom or with your own children. I think it really helps parents to, to have examples and then they can elaborate on that and find their own.
Concrete examples. Sure. For example, telling them what you would like to see um, instead of what not to do. So, walk, please, instead of don't run. And Katie, I think you might have had a few other ideas.
So with my own kids, I would, prompt them with, tell your sister that you don't like what she did, instead of just telling her, stop poking her or things like that. It's really about framing things in a positive way about what you want to see versus what you don't want to see.
Instead of repeating yourself over and over, but taking the time to stop, look at their eyes, get on their level, and say it to them instead of saying it around them a million times and nobody's listening. Even that is being present and making that connection. You're going to get better results.
I really like to ask kids to, what they can do instead of what they were doing. And I do remember another funny situation. This was with Aaron's son. He gives us a lot of funny examples. And we had some guests at my California home. Aaron and her kids were here, and then we had some guests from Sweden. And McKinley was the only boy in the mix, and he was having a really hard time kind of figuring out how to play with the girls and without bugging them. And he was getting kind of aggressive and rough. He was very, very young at this time. I think maybe 3, something like that. And so he was really getting aggressive, and I kind of had to, pull him out of the room where the girls were and just do some of these strategies you're talking about. And then as we kind of calmed down together, I asked him what he could do or what he needed to do when he went back in to try to play with the girls. And he just looked so serious, and he thought for kind of a long time, and then he said, not pull eyeballs out of their heads. I could just picture, what his reptile brain was telling him to do with those girls. So he was needing to get up in that executive function and think about it. And then he just laughed because he always loved to come up with the funny one-liner, and that was a good one. But I do think kids are so good at doing some of this work for us, especially if we've done it with them for a while and then they start thinking that way. Another example is we have a pool in our backyard in Minneapolis, and it's a very popular place both for my grandchildren and also for my friends and their grandchildren. And with those kids, I always start by asking them what they think the rules should be at the pool. Just getting them to generate those rules, and then I can refer back to that. It's not like I have to tell them what they're doing wrong or what they could do instead, but engage them in it. But it's the same thing, and you think about raising kids as they mature and, kind of helping them learn to make those decisions for themselves about what they could do when they're having these negative impulses. So, I hope you don't mind my elaborating on this, but, I'm old. I've had a lot of years of doing this and failing at it in many ways, but finding a few successes along the way too. And I love this topic.
Well, it is such a great topic. Go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to say with that too, I think that, whether you want to get into conscious discipline and find some new resources to help with parenting, I think that it is definitely a journey and it does not come overnight. And I think that's, important to realize too, that, and conscious discipline asks us to make some different changes or maybe to shift our mindset on a few things. And, and it's not what we were doing before is necessarily bad. It's just, I think Sarah made a good point before that it's working against the brain a little bit, some of the things that we were, taught growing up. And so conscious discipline can really offer some new tools to make things easier.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I love too that you kind of set those expectations for ourselves in a realistic way that this isn't something we're going to develop a perfection or mastery of overnight, that it takes time and it requires change, and it probably requires some neuroplasticity and new neural connections to make that change and really get comfortable with these different approaches. So I'm curious, how does conscious discipline tie into other areas of development for children?
I think it ties into everything because it has to do with the executive function, the regulation. If children aren't ready to learn, then we have to get them to that place. If a brain is flooded with cortisol, stress hormones, then the new vocab isn't going to stick. So let's get them to a place where they're ready to learn. And when we're talking about the executive function, um, we actually are able to assess this in our schools. So then we can take these assessments, see which children maybe need a little extra support, and the conscious discipline is giving us these skills. They complement each other so well. So I really feel like it ties into every area of development.
Yeah, I have definitely found in the classroom, but also at home, that this isn't, something that's separate from everything else that I have to add into my day. It's one more thing to do. That really conscious discipline, like Sarah said, complements everything and really gives me a base for everything to do during the day, whether it's, adding in those connections that helps me transition through different parts of the day, or helping them get to an executive state, which then, okay, now I can teach you something. So
That I love that, as kind of looking at this as sort of the essential foundation from which all these other things develop, strengthening and building on executive functioning skills, learning. I would imagine that kids who have had a lot of experience with this are probably a lot better to handle some of the challenges of new academic environments as they move out of early childhood and into elementary and middle school.
Yeah, I was having that same thought, and I wonder if either of you, Sarah or Katie, could elaborate a little bit on what you've seen in terms of academic skills or even pre-academic skills with the young children that you often serve. Some of the things that we think of in terms of how they're organizing their learning and following through on tasks and that sort of thing. Do you see clear benefits? And also, are there specific examples of what you can do around those kinds of situations, either as parents or as teachers?
You know, I will say that we started implementing mindfulness activities probably 3 years ago. And I do feel our executive function scores are climbing in our older age children. And so we've also, yeah, it's interesting. We're watching it at this time. So we've also implemented the Reggio approach, but we have seen a difference in our scores, particularly in our 4 and 5 year olds. And so we're kind of watching that to see what that is.
Can I interrupt you for just a second, Sarah? You referred to the Reggio approach, and a lot of our listeners might not know what that is, the Reggio Emilia approach. Can you just, give us a nutshell? I know that could be a whole topic and maybe several podcasts, but.
Sure. The Reggio approach, child-centered approach, where the child is a co-learner along with the teachers. So the child leads the learning. We support their questions. They are the researchers of their own learning.
Well, thank you for elaborating on that. So I'm wondering, for our parents at home or other early childhood or even later school providers might be interested in learning more about this and kind of developing some of these skills for themselves. Is there information or a place where you would direct people to learn more about this?
Yes, definitely the website, just www.consciousdiscipline.com, has a wealth of information. And you can sign up and have a Conscious Discipline account, and there are many free resources on the website. And there is a section just for parents, and then also for early childhood and school age as well. And so that is a great place to start. You can follow Conscious Discipline on Instagram as well and Facebook. And they have great resources on there as well, and short little videos that are helpful. And then also on YouTube, if you just Google Dr. Becky Bailey, Conscious Discipline, there's also a bunch of great resources on there as well.
We'll link to some of these with our podcast on the homepage where we post everything about the show. And we just are so grateful for both of you joining us. Again, we have Sarah Reichstad and Katie Zhang joining us from Kinderberry Hill Child Development Centers, one of Mom Enough's supporting partners, and actually where my kids went to preschool. So we have some personal positive experiences from Kinderberry Hill, and it's so great to see how you are continuing to stay current with the research on early childhood and really providing the best environment for children to learn. So we so appreciate your time today and for telling us more about conscious discipline.
Oh, thank you for having us.
All right. Well, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. We so appreciate it. We hope you'll tune in again next week for another episode of Mom Enough.
Content copyrighted by Marty and Aaron Erickson. All rights reserved. Visit momenoughcomp14053.com for an archive of all Mom Enough shows and many free downloadable resources on child development, parenting, and maternal health and well-being.
Do you think I'll have a show called Kid Enough someday?